Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where we take a look at the stories being followed in the upcoming edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined by North Coast Journal's news editor, Thad Greenson, and arts and features editor, Jennifer Fumiko Cahill. Welcome, guys.
How you doing?
Hi, David.
Doing well, thanks. We got some blue sky sunshine. We had a nice long weekend. Let's dive right in then. And Thad, why don't you tell us what's on the cover story this week?
Yeah, this week we dive into the texting scandal that has kind of rocked the Eureka Police Department for the last couple of months since the Sacramento Bee reported back in March on it for the first time. They had a batch of text messages that a source leaked to them that they published a story based on. And so this week's cover story, we attempted to verify those texts by through a California Public Records Act request with the city, and got a much bigger batch of texts actually in return than the Bee worked from, and dove into them.
So can you tell us a little bit of context for folks who might not be familiar with this? Kind of like they were categorized, classified by Sacramento Bee, I don't know the right verb here, but as vulgar, misogynistic, and dehumanizing text messages, depicting a unit with a culture that objectifies and dehumanizes women, embraces violence, and detests homeless people. There's a lot in there, but can you tell us a little bit about what you saw in these texts and kind of how our community has responded?
Yeah, I think that was actually my description of them, but I feel it's an accurate one. So these text messages were all exchanged between a unit of officers, I think about 6 or 7 officers at a time, although there were 12 to 14 in the unit over the time period of the texts, but because some officers switched in and out. But it was a unit led by Sergeant Rodrigo Reyna Sanchez, who's a 20-plus year veteran of the force. And they're either text messages were exchanged on their personal cell phones, but relate to city business and relate to police work. And so that's why we were able to access them. And, it's very much them going through the course of their day. And some of the texts are related to calls that they're responding to, or kind of be on the lookout warnings or things that you would expect cops to be talking about. And then there's just a lot of commentary and a lot of back and forth between the officers. And I think the characterization of it as vulgar and dehumanizing is very fair.
So that's the backstory. So before we get into sort of the content that you guys were able to uncover, I wanted to ask you. So there's an investigation underway. The police department, I guess, hired a law firm. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so very promptly after the Bee's report came out and these text messages first surfaced, the city hired an outside law firm, so it's a law firm from the Bay Area, to conduct an independent third-party investigation, and gave the firm pretty much carte blanche to conduct this investigation as it sees fit. There's some lines in the contract saying very plainly that it's up to the firm to decide kind of the scope and methods involved in the investigation and its findings, and it will operate free from any city interference. And through a separate California Public Records Act request, we learned that the firm had billed the city, I think, for about 50 hours at considerable cost, more than $16,000 through the end of April so far in the investigation.
So rough math, that's like about $350 or so an hour.
Lawyers don't come cheap.
Yeah. And so one element of this is that a couple of the officers were placed on administrative leave. Mm-hmm. And then more recently, I guess, there was a captain also placed on administrative leave. Can you tell us a little bit about that piece of this story?
Yeah, so pretty much immediately, I think about the same time they announced the investigation, Chief Steve Watson announced that Reyna Sanchez, the sergeant, and an officer, Mark Mefta, were both placed on paid admin leave pending the outcome of this investigation. And those were the two officers. There's other officers that definitely chime in and say offensive things, but those two were, according to the text, really responsible for the vast majority of comments that I think the average person would feel really crosses a pretty bright line. So they were placed on leave, back in March, and then just last week we were able to confirm that one of the department's two captains, Captain Patrick O'Neill, has also been placed on paid admin leave pending an investigation. Now we don't know if that is directly tied to the internal affairs investigation regarding the text messages or something separate. Chief Watson wouldn't confirm that or comment one way or the other, just saying that they can't comment on personnel matters and get into the exact reasons why an investigation is underway.
So did any of these messages you reviewed stand out, like anything the community should be aware of at this time? So for example, you mentioned the violence, misogyny, and hatred or contempt for homeless people. Anything stand out in that regard?
There's lots there, and a lot of them are far too vulgar to repeat on television. So I would encourage folks to read the article and really get a direct account of what was said. But I think first of all, the overall tone and references to women are just deeply troubling, and just kind of the objectification of women, both a woman on the force as well as women that they come into contact with through police work. So that definitely stands out just as an overall theme. I mean, no singular comment. And then there's a number of comments regarding homeless people that are just are pretty horrible. So there's one where an officer, there was a fire some months back at John's Auto Wreckers, and they're talking about it on the text thread. And Sergeant Sanchez says, it's filled, the place is filled with combustible materials, oils and gas. And Mark Mefta responds, well, I'm going to round up some trogs, is what he calls them. That's the unit's term that they repeatedly refer to homeless people with. But I'm going to round up some trogs and push them inside. There's another thread where Mark Mefta just seemingly unprompted says, I wonder if we can get a helicopter to do a really low flyover of Old Town to decapitate a bunch of trogs. And so those two really stand out. But reading, dozens and dozens of these messages, the thread that runs through them all is just seemingly a dehumanizing contempt for the people that they're sworn to serve.
Oh my goodness, how unfortunate this is. So for people that don't know, trog is referencing troglodytes, which are prehistoric cave-dwelling people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's very clear from the context of the messages that this is their preferred term for homeless people.
And something that Thad says in the editorial this week is that we're not we're not in Sunday school over here. Like, we're a newsroom. People are sometimes gruff and rough. There's a lot of gallows humor. Nobody, on our staff is much of a shrinking violet. You can't be and report on, or, just like in so many jobs, sometimes a callous attitude is, how you cope, is how a lot of people cope with stress and, cope with violence and things like that. But reading just some of these, just the tip of the iceberg, because there was too much to fit into the cover story this week. But reading those comments and hearing about what else there was, the general tone made me think I would not feel safe around these people, and I absolutely would not feel safe under their power. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the thing, right? It's not just, well, would you really do what you're saying? Is it a joke? Whatever. This is a break in the trust, the public's trust and feeling of safety with people who are meant to serve and protect.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I would just add that these also aren't, messages exchanged between singular officers. This is the way a unit of the Eureka Police Department was communicating with one another. And these were messages conveyed by, in some instances, and in others, in front of their supervisor, the sergeant who runs this unit. So this is very much indicative, I think, of the culture of that particular unit anyway.
So in the article, you mentioned Mayor Seaman quoted as saying, "Public trust is hard to earn and easy to lose. People are angry, and they should be." And just to paraphrase, she said, "There's no excuse." So this is one of those things where there was a response from the community. There were protests that called for dismissal, but that didn't happen because of procedure. Could you tell us a little bit about the police officer's procedural Bill of Rights?
Yeah, so in every state in the country, but even more so in California, police officers enjoy certain workplace protections that the rest of us just don't. And so, for instance, if somehow it were made public that I had sent a text message like this, I would be fired without cause immediately. I'm an at-will employee, and that would be that. Police officers have much enhanced protections. So the Police Officers Procedural Bill of Rights is a series of state laws that kind of outlines how disciplinary actions can be taken against individual officers and affords them workplace protections. And so, one of the big questions that the protesters were asking, or one of the things they were demanding, was that these officers be fired immediately. Well, the Bill of Rights actually says that an officer can't be fired until, there is a sustained finding of wrongdoing. So it means they need to be investigated first, and there needs to be the sustained finding that goes through due process. And some of these due process protections they have, for instance, are they have a right to an attorney that is paid for by the Legal Defense Fund that's in contract with their union. They have a right to be advised of the allegations against them before they give any statements. And when they're actually brought in for an interview, they can be compelled to give an interview, but it has to be under certain terms. And so it has to be during their workday. They have to be given breaks. They can only be questioned by one officer at a time. And so, obviously this is much different than the average workplace. And then once there is a sustained finding of wrongdoing, which generally is a determination made by the police chief, it is in Eureka anyway, they have multiple avenues for appeal. So they can first appeal to the city's personnel board, and then if that's unsuccessful, appeal to the city council. And in every step of this process, they are entitled to that legal defense. And so the way it works locally anyway is that the LDF can include some very high-priced out-of-town attorneys, and that's a formidable challenge for a city. And a lot of times what you'll see is cities then contract out to outside counsel to try to match that legal expertise, and it becomes very expensive very quickly for cities.
And I thought a significant part of this, not to get super into the weeds, but is that this is all governed by privacy, secrecy elements to that Bill of Rights, that there only a very limited amount of this can become public. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad you brought that up. Yeah, not only do they, have these due process protections, but they also have, even in cases with sustained findings of wrongdoing, they have tremendous protections over their personnel files. And so actually just a couple years ago, California passed a landmark bill that opened up kind of a small portion of these files to public viewing for the first time. And so this bill, ruled that if there's an officer-involved shooting, a use of force that causes great bodily injury, a sustained finding of sexual assault, or a sustained finding of dishonesty, those records can be released to the public. But every other record of a police officer's wrongdoing remain not just hidden from the public, but hidden from even other officers on the force. And so if there's an accusation made and somebody's placed on paid leave for a couple days or reprimanded, other officers on the force don't know what the allegation was, they don't know what the findings of the investigation were, and they don't know exactly what the discipline handed down was. It's all shrouded in secrecy, which is, in my view, very problematic. And one thing I wanted to make sure folks understood about this process and this investigation that's going on is there's a very real chance, I would say it's very likely, that the public's never going to know the full findings of this investigation or the full extent of discipline handed down as a result. I mean, obviously, if an officer leaves the force or is fired, that's, a matter of public record, but we're not going to get a detailed explanation of exactly why and exactly what the findings of the investigation were.
And you mentioned that much of this disciplinary discretion will fall into the hands of the police chief exclusively.
Yes, in this case, absolutely. Some departments have discipline matrices, which kind of give a range of discipline for certain violations of policy or procedure. Eureka doesn't have one of those, and even if it did, I'm not sure there's a point on that matrix that really fits the situation we're looking at here. But so yeah, it'll be entirely up to Steve Watson to determine what he thinks is not just what he thinks is just, but what he thinks will be upheld. I don't think any police chief wants to met out a level of discipline that is then overturned down the road.
To be fair to police Police Chief Steve Watson, and you start your article off by saying that he did tell his department, he expressed 5 departmental purposes, vision, values, and goals. He said we must do what's right, do the best you can, and treat people the way you'd like to be treated. So there's, I mean, at least me personally, I'm hopeful that he will exercise this discretion carefully, to be determined.
Indeed. Yeah, I think, he took some bold steps by immediately farming this out, not to an internal investigation, but an outside firm, and by placing these officers on leave, pretty immediately.
And just to wrap up this, I know we spent a lot of time here, but there's a quote that you shared from a former EPD officer. Hopefully you could tell us just real briefly. She said, there's a long road ahead. Eureka and Humboldt County have a long road ahead if the goal is to become evolved, unbiased, and effective in public safety.
Yeah, I spoke to Kay Howden, who's recently retired from EPD after, I think, 26 years there. She said two of the things that jumped out to me from our conversation is, one, she said that she was surprised by how bold these comments were and sharing them in this text change, but she was not really surprised by the content of them. And which is kind of alarming to me. And then I think we kind of closed our conversation by saying she hopes that this will be a sea change moment in Eureka, that this investigation and the aftermath of it will be a sea change for the department. And that was notable to me because it wasn't writing this off as a couple of bad eggs or a couple people that got overly exuberant on a text chain, but that this is indicative of a larger problem, is what I took that quote to mean.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll see more in future editions on how this goes down. Hey, Jennifer, what's going on this week in the arts and feature beat?
Well, I want to start off with a small announcement that's very exciting to me. Arts Alive is coming back in a small, kind of a soft opening way. They're not doing like a big to-do until next month. But the June Arts Alive is on this weekend, and that's kind of a nice sign of things returning. A lot of it, as you know, is like, walking around outdoors. But, there are a handful of venues showing art or having music, and it's another great reason to go out and get vaccinated so that you can enjoy the offerings that are coming our way. Among those offerings is, by the way, going to the movies. I've seen a few people that I know on Facebook posting like, oh, I went to the movies. But then our screens, I affectionately call him a movie nerd, John J. Bennett, went back to the theater. And he's always been sort of he refers to himself as a curmudgeon in the way of, he loves the theater, loves the tradition, loves the communal experience, doesn't love crying babies, somebody's dog in the front row, people talking, candy wrappers. So in a way, like, we're at the point now where that's all nostalgic, where people talking through the movie, and talking at the movie is like, oh, look, we're back to that annoying thing. Isn't it nice? So anyway, he went to see Cruella, which he says is fantastic and you should check out. Please read the review. And also A Quiet Place 2, which he says very little about because he doesn't want to hit you with any spoilers, but check out the review this week. And again, that's another thing that is like vaccination is, making it possible for you to go do that safely. So think about it. Yes. But I have a couple of outdoor eating options that I checked out this week. New options. A couple of things are trending right now. One, lamb. The other, black trucks. So there are two very minimalist looking black trucks that have opened up in Humboldt County. One is Pig and Leaf, which is over at Humboldt's first cannabis consumption site, the Papa and Barkley Social, which is over in the old Kmart in Eureka. Oh. And so they have this little like patio off to the side, and they've got like fire pits and outside heaters and all this stuff. And there's a smoking section, which I was like, where are my giant sneakers and shoulder pads? There's 80s smoking section is back. So some trends return, but it's an outdoor smoking section. And then there's a whole other section without consumption going on. Anyway, so this truck, I should point out, it's not infused food. There's no cannabis food from the truck. It's all just food because that's still illegal. the health department will not allow any kind of cannabis infused food to come out of that truck. So don't like wink and order your fries and be like, yeah, no, it's not happening. But they do have, Pig and Leaf is run by Pavel Gago, who his name may be familiar from Pizza Gago. He referred to Pizza Gago as being on pause during the pandemic, for much of the pandemic, slowly coming back as gatherings come back. But he is running the kitchen for the Jetty at Humboldt Bay Social Club. He's opening up the Scotia Lodge kitchen, which apparently might be the biggest kitchen in Humboldt County. I need to go check that out. And he's doing Pig and Leaf. And Pig and Leaf has a lot of international flavors happening on one menu. There's some very nice pork shank drumettes, which think of like the most tender little pork shank morsels with a coconut and pineapple and turmeric glaze. Just very nice, like meat falling off the bone, kind of an appetizer thing. And a Eastern Mediterranean lamb pita. And it's a little different from, say, the Kebab Cafe or Cafe Nooner, places where it's more of a Greek pita. This is more, a little more sumac, a little more deeper, earthier flavors. And it's just a different kind of lamb pita. So anyway, you should check that out and enjoy it. I will say it was very good, and I was not high. So, but I was like, why are they trying so hard? If I was opening up a truck next to a cannabis consumption lounge, I would just have cold cereal. I would be like, hey, you guys, Eggo waffles. I would not even be trying, but they're really, doing something interesting and making it a lot of big flavors, making it a very varied and a fun menu. The other place that I checked out was the Nosh, which I was very excited to see all the Yiddish on the menu. There's a lot of food that speaks to kind of a Middle Eastern palate. And I spoke to the owner, Cassandra Kelly, of Cassandra Kelly Catering, who now has this truck over at Septentrio. And Septentrio has like a posh outdoor setting to drink wine and whatnot. And there's like, again, heat lamps and Adirondack chairs and like tented areas. So it's very like, it's made for outdoor dining, which now that, restrictions are easing up on the 15th, it's still nice to be outdoors while we've got the weather for it.
Totally.
And anyway, so they have a lot of kind of interesting items. If you have been wanting to try pig ear, now is your time. I'm a fan of pig ear in general. I have not tried the pig ear at the Nosh yet, but yeah, it was neat to talk to them about their upbringing in LA around not only traditional Jewish foods from their family, but also from, the Armenian and Persian food in the neighborhood. I think is it called Little Armenia, the neighborhood? Anyway, so there's a lot of flavors from those cuisines, including like sumac and like a sort of a half meat or half beef and half lamb mixture for some of the proteins. And then there's shug ketchup, which is a kind of like an herbal mixture, like an herbal salsa that's mixed with their homemade or their organic ketchup, which is the shug is homemade, the ketchup is not. But they are playing with a lot of flavors. And actually my favorite thing was a very wonderful creamy bacalao rolled inside of a wonton skin. And yes, I hear that Italian gasp happening from David.
Yeah,
the salted cod and potato and cheese, creamy goodness. Like, I know, you think to yourself, I don't know, salted cod, if you haven't, eaten it before, but if you have eaten it, you will know this is the stuff. But it's neat, and they're looking to do brunch in the future, and I'm seeing a lot of trucks thriving. And so in this time when we're kind of emerging from the pandemic and seeing so many businesses that we've lost, it's nice to see a few that survive. And it seems like the nimble nature of a truck, the low overhead, those are going to be some survivors that we can look forward to enjoying and supporting.
Right on. Thanks, Jennifer. This is really cool to hear that we've got all these new places to try out. These trucks just sound like you're making me hungry the way you described them. Not that that's that difficult, but
this is my job, David.
This is awesome. We appreciate you. Well, Thad and Jennifer, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys keeping us informed and letting us know about these great things going on in our community. That's just about going to do it for us this week. North Coast Journal's on newsstands right now. Pick one up, stay informed, find them online. Thad, Jennifer, thanks so much, and we'll see you guys again next week.
See you next week.
Bye, guys.